Every day, we can experience a full range of emotions, from joy to grief, peace, frustration, and everything in between.
But we're still expected to be an A player at work, be a good partner, to parent children, take care of our animals, and have food on the table, even in the throes of grief. So how the hell are we supposed to do it all?
On the Human Sessions podcast, we'll guide you through strategies for being your authentic self in every part of your life, no matter which emotions are in the driver's seat that day. We'll talk about how human design, energy, and Reiki can all be useful tools for showing up and showing up well.
And if we lost you at the word energy, I promise you will walk away from every episode with tactical tips to feel more like yourself.
I'm Rachel Hatterberg-Walt, human energetics expert and Reiki master.
And I'm Val Marini, grief and trauma specialist and energy healer. This is a no bullshit zone.
This is an anti-perfectionism haven.
This is the Human Sessions podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Human Sessions. Today we're going to dive into the topic of seasonality, specifically the season of winter. And we mean winter in the respect of perhaps cold weather, darker skies, snow, darkness early, yes, but also metaphorically meaning times of rest, times of hibernation, times of change and thinking about what's to come, but laying low, having things dying off and being in that moment of incubating things between the dying of fall and then the rebirth of the spring, this liminal space that is winter. We are also in this year, where we're recording this, 2025, in very much a liminal space, a time of transition, a time of old ways falling off and preparing for new ways to be birthed. So it feels very relevant to talk about it right now. What do you think, Val?
Yeah, I totally agree. And what Rachel really mentioned that I think is important is that, if we look back and, if we're following cycles of nature and, animals hibernate typically in the winter and it's about resting and recharging and preparing for that growth. But we have so many other factors in our human lives now where we're, not living outside and we're not necessarily as connected to the rhythms of nature. So we're seeing a lot of shifting in just how that shows up. So sometimes, and the way that I try to intentionally practice it goes with those cycles of the seasons that are more about like, I try to align to cold weather, but naturally that's also a downtime for me. Mm-hmm. Like I want to hibernate. I always want to kind of retract into my home and use this time to plan and get organized and recharge. And it's that like cozy weather. What are you doing in your like internal environment, whether it's inside your body or just inside home, inside family? But there are going to be times when like the quote cold season is an emotional thing or is just based off events in life. And we need to sometimes remind ourselves that we have that invitation, we have that permission at any chapter to pull back and protect and recharge. And that may happen in the warmest month of the year. Right. And that's also okay. It's really about making sure that we have those cycles of rest, recharge, and then more intentional growth so that we don't get caught up in cycles that are not natural to us and start to disconnect even more from people, from ourselves, and from those rhythms. So I think that's...
Well, and it's a really critical component. Without the winter, we can't have the spring, we can't have the summer, we can't have the fall, and all the things we love about those literal seasons and metaphorical seasons. And I think as, Western kind of United States focused as we are right now, it's so ingrained in our culture to bypass all of those cues of the winter. Yeah. When we feel like we need to rest, we bulldoze those intuitive hits and inclinations and just push and girl boss our way through it. And this is really an invitation to check yourself before you wreck yourself, as I like to tell my kids. Thanks, Ice Cube.
Totally.
Because it can make us in burnout cycles. It can rob us of personal transformation and healing that we want to bring forward, obviously, with this podcast. And so I think first, your first step with aligning to the quote unquote season of winter is to do it from the literal season,
Yeah.
perhaps. If that feels right to you. If you are in a season of, whoa, something really traumatic happened or some really big transition is happening and you are in a metaphorical winter,
Mhm.
then by all means step into it there
Yeah.
and feel very free to have self empowerment around hibernating, getting insular, having space for your thoughts and your contemplation, having safe physical space that you can create in your home or somewhere else, even in your imagination if your home doesn't feel
Yeah.
safe. By all means, exit in where it feels natural to you. But if this is something you're dabbling in and you're trying on for size, taking the opportunity in winter, I think
Yeah.
feels really nice.
I mean, I think there's like a natural invitation that we can ignore or not. And, as you were talking, I was thinking, this is life and everything that we have to endure and to be durable in that. It's like training for a marathon. So if you have a stress fracture or you have an injury and you are in the training and you're not, it's like you're in this, you have a goal and you're trying to move forward. Training injured is not going to actually get you to that destination. The longer you run on the injury, you're never going to make it to the marathon. You're going to have to stop. You're not going to hit your goals, all of those same things. And I think some of the handicaps that we have built in and things that we maybe haven't tapped into over the last couple decades is because we are so much more global than we are localized in our communities, in our rituals, in holidays. There's a reason why we see such a spike, and we talked about this a little bit in some of the like holiday rituals and how to create boundaries with family around the holidays. But there's a lot of factors, right? So we get to this post holiday season and we have like depression is at a rise.
Hmm.
A lot of these systems and structures that we're in and we're not going to really get out of right now, like the kind of capitalistic calendar, we start the beginning of the year. And that's why we have so much like resolution. Like it's like the gun goes off and we're like back at a sprint. But if we didn't lean into that recovery in through the holidays and instead we felt like the pressure to do all the parties, the pressure to host parties, the pressure to be with family, host family, show up for everything, show up for everybody else, we've like depleted instead of refilled. And then suddenly it's the beginning of the year and we're like, oh goodness, I looked at the other day and I'm like, oh, we're in this year.
Hmm.
I feel like I'm still kind of calibrating, but this was the first year for me that I actually took vacation at the end of the year and took vacation from all expectations, not just work.
Hmm.
I had permission for the first time at work. I had gave permission to my team to do the same thing. Like I know we're going to have a lot on our plates this year. There was no sense in pushing it further than we needed to. But I think that's the really hard shift for folks who don't have, we don't have kids. I have a pretty flexible, awesome work life. And there's just been enough changes in my family that there aren't the same expectations that there may have been 10 or 15 years ago. So it was accessible. But if
Hmm.
it's not built in, how do we intentionally move into that
Hmm.
and give ourselves and others that same permission?
Right. Well, I think one of the tools you mentioned that we've talked about before is the boundary
Hmm.
part. It's like what feels easiest in my schedule, maybe, or in my bank account, or
Yep.
in my physical energy that I feel comfortable to set a boundary around to start the process and the momentum of the rock going down the hill to get that ball rolling. Maybe it is, where you would potentially fill a Saturday night with
Yeah.
plans that you boundary that and say, no, I'm going to stay home tonight. And
Yep.
it's just that one Saturday that sparks something else and more confidence to set a boundary. And maybe you have to say, a powerful no. I'm really going to stay and rest tonight, but thank you for inviting me type of a thing. It doesn't have to be this huge overhaul of your life and your
Yeah.
schedule initially. Like, be easy with yourself, be easy with your nervous system. Start small, start accessible, and then build from there. This doesn't have to be overnight. That's just another way that Western capitalistic kind of pushing it society creeps in is like, no, you can be easy with yourself. You can start off small. You can start off comfortable and then build from there and allow yourself to enjoy the process. Heaven forbid, enjoy the process,
Yeah.
right? When you were talking about a resting season or a dying off season or a hibernating season, an incubation period type of a
Mhm.
thing, really goes against, resolutions starting.
Yep.
It really goes against pushing through and doing. It really makes me think too of the cultural conversation we had in our last episode. I mentioned I was Scandinavian, and the Scandinavians are notoriously like loving winter, love
Mhm.
embracing the cold, embracing outside. Like they wrap up their babies and they leave them in their strollers while they're going to have a nice little cozy meal inside the restaurant. Like, so I think that might be another way that you could open up the season of winter for yourself is like, well, what do I like about winter? What parts of it do I like? Do I like being inside and cozy and lighting a
Yeah.
fire and reading a book? Or do I like the thrill of being outside in the colder weather? Do I like going on a winter walk? For instance, on this past weekend, actually, I was supposed to work, and then we had a little bit of winter weather come through our area here
Just a
in North
titch.
Carolina. My kids were extremely disappointed on how that came through. They were like imagining feet of snow, and it was like a dusting of snow and like some ice. They still managed to sled, but
That's
I
actually
think in
impressive.
Crocs.
Yeah.
Actually, I think my oldest was in Crocs. But I was supposed to work and it was canceled due to the weather. And my kids had obligations doing something at one of the Davidson College basketball games that I had been a part of before and everything. And my husband was like, "Do you want me to get you a ticket now that you don't have work?" And I was like, "No, I
Yeah.
don't.
No.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to choose me and choose winter right now. Y'all are fine. Y'all are going to have fun. All their friends are there. I've already been in this experience with them. They already didn't have the expectation of me there. So I'm going to take the dogs and I'm going to go to the state park and I'm going to do a winter hike with my dogs."
Yep.
And it was because I have talked about this on other episodes too, but I have an extremely large need to be alone and be alone in the time of like not at home during a work day where I might have an hour where I don't feel the need to have responsibilities. Like those
Yeah.
responsibilities are there, like home responsibilities, work responsibilities, being an entrepreneur, it never shuts off. There's always something that I'm carrying in that moment. But on a Saturday afternoon where I am not expected to be anywhere, I could really just exhale. I literally
Yeah.
hugged trees. I got to see frozen water. I got to feel the breeze. I crunched in the ice of the snow. I got to see my dogs be really excited about being out in
Yeah.
nature. I can't tell you the refreshment that I
Yeah.
felt for that. I'm also very fiery, and the counterbalance of being out in the cold really sparks my imagination and creativity and everything too. So not only did I fill my cup up and allow myself to embrace the beauty of the winter and the sounds and sights and feelings of the winter in my own energy, but it also ignited a lot. I mean, I created the space to allow the
Yeah.
creativity to come through too, but it was just, and it was only an hour and a half, guys. Like, it's not like I spent the entire afternoon out there. Like, this is accessible a lot of
Yeah.
times, and we just automatically assume it's not too. So, I wonder if another step, if you're starting to be in rhythm of the seasons, is check your limiting beliefs around your capacity to do so. Because my guess is there's probably more availability than maybe you think there is.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And this threads into so many areas because certainly nature, I think when we're out of our own natural cycles and we're in the cycles of like society and this like achievement culture that we're in and just how busy everybody is, whether we want to be or not, we can try to align with having our own intention and not being in that rhythm. It's very, very hard. Like you're trying to
Yeah.
still live in the world and be present in it and productive, however you personally define that. But it's interesting because we're seeing this huge lack in the recharge and preparation and wintering through the holidays. It's very stressful. It is draining. We cross right over. It's like, okay, go time, everything reset. We're starting at zero. We've got it like, and there's a smart and natural inclination to be like, I'm going to front load this year so that I'm not at the end of the year, like really trying to wrap everything up. And I get that. And from like a just how you plan, of course, you always want to like have a more solid foundation so that you can be more paced later on. However, if we haven't recharged, that is not a path to sustainability. And the most important part in our health and the point of wintering is to build sustainably in.
I was about to say that is the magical word, right? Like
Yeah.
be aligned with sustainability. With everything. That's in
Yeah.
relationships, that's in creation, health, business, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you have
Yeah.
more control over that of how you're building the structure of your business. Like
Productive burnout.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, there's research around sustainable designed businesses are more successful, more profitable, and make a
Yeah.
great impact in the community and in their employees and how they co-create together. So it's in even a capitalistic society's best interest to build sustainability in lives in various directions.
Totally.
Well, and I was talking with my client yesterday about this. There's a concept in human design around a generator's energetic patterning called plateauing. And a lot of generators make the misunderstanding that it's a sign that something's going wrong or they're not on the
Yeah.
right path or they need to do, because generators are so associated around, action and stuff too. But it's a wintering period. It is a time of
Yeah.
integration. It is a time of incubation. It is a time of hibernation. It is the juiciest part of the whole creation process, right? And I was talking to my client about this yesterday, and she was saying how she feels comfortable in the plateau. What an integrated place to be, if we can feel comfortable in the rest, allowing our nervous systems to recover, allowing creation and the universe and God to really do the unseen things that help us feel so synchronistic and on purpose and aligned and bring in manifestations and things. It's just so critical to a lot of different levels of how we live, how we create, how we build. Even in rehabilitation. So I'm also a speech language pathologist. And with my speech clients that have had strokes and things, I had this one client earlier last year that was really focused on the work phase of the rehab process
Yeah.
and wouldn't allow himself the rest. And he was working against himself and he had more falls. His muscles
Yeah.
were weaker. And so we worked a lot around, look, I know this is a lot. I know there's a lot of conditioning and stories around being able to rest, but this is a critical component of your
Yeah.
rehab. And if you want to make these goals, which you say you do, this is just as important as putting in reps on the bike. Like,
Yep.
and we don't have a lot of concepts around that in this kind of Western society. However, people are trying desperately to get us to wake
Yeah.
up to go to sleep, I guess. Because I mean, what comes to mind is the Nap Ministry, which is a beautiful organization that is like resting is resistance.
Yeah.
Right? Like we are going to go against this capitalistic girl boss hustle society and sacrificing ourselves to our making money and profitability and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, we're going to rest, and how radical that is. And I love that.
Well, and it's also like, I mean, yes, we have influences from the systems that we're in, but there's also like a competitive nature
Mhm.
that comes through. I mean, it is, and when we're starting something new or we want to be successful or quote girl bossing, which like, I think we both, or I will speak for myself. I don't love the concept of it. I also
No.
find like the forums and the perpetuation of that like hustle culture just like exhausting, even in conversation, not even in practice. Obviously in practice it's exhausting, but going back to like the resolution concept, we know that by the second Friday of the year, most people have already quit or
Mhm.
like completely abandoned their resolution. So
Mhm.
it's like maybe it's not the idea. And I don't love the word, I think because of the concept. But if we were going to go with resolutions, I still love revolution. That's still my vibe for all my founding members that went through that program last year. Like because it embeds more of the idea of sustainability and
Yeah.
it's a more intentional, a more conscious look at what do I want to change? What do I want to have in my life that I need to allow in? But just because it's the beginning of the year doesn't mean that it's going to change the fact that habits are built incrementally. It's like, what's the one small change that I can make? And maybe that is time for rest. So then I am recharged and I have the energy to then create the habit that is, quote, productive or just requires more energy.
Mhm.
And we just skip that occasionally, or even if we try it, we don't have the patience to stick with it for the 30, 60, 90 days it's going to take for us to like kind of feel it out, to make the space, to start to build the habit so that we can have the discipline. And then the confidence that pairs with that discipline is truly what creates a sustainable habit. Like when you're getting good feedback from it, and it's also like, okay, how are we thinking about this? Let's say I want to be able to, and I'm giving such a random thing, I would never do this, but run a half marathon at the end of the year. Not one of my goals. But if I want to run a half marathon at the end of the year, and I am too proud to start by walking 2 miles a day, going from 0 to 2 miles. Like, I am absolutely going to place an expectation on myself that is going to mentally, emotionally, and energetically shut me down before I can even lay that first block.
Mhm.
So it's just taking, okay, where do we want to be? Being really conscious about that. I'll share mine. So I'm doing like my intention setting. I've been very formulaic with it. I'm going through my own process this year of really like exploring different things and giving myself a few days to think about like, why do I want to do that? Is this something that feels good in a moment when I'm in high energy and I'm doing this work? 3 days later, when I'm tired, does that still appeal to me?
Mhm.
And so this year's focus for me is around creativity. And so when I was working on my little matrix of how I plan out my intentions and then I kind of build the habits aligned to them, it was like, well, what do I actually, if I can create an hour for myself, what do I need more of? Do I need to work out for an hour more physically, or do I need to open up creatively so that I can create that like energetic flow and give my brain a break? Because a lot of times I will use like walking, I talk about that a lot, or hiking outside
Mhm.
as an opportunity to let my mind be a little bit more thoughtful, to solve problems away from the problem. And that's a great tool for me. If I'm in the middle of a problem at work, I know I'm not like standing at my desk and sending more emails is not going to solve that problem. Stepping away and taking a walk for me is the like ER triage version of like, okay, let me allow myself the space to process this. But if I'm talking about something else, like more of a macro life item or a habit, or I'm like feeling grief kind of going through my plumbing and all of the my energetic channels, I need something a little bit different. And so this year, and I'm now committed to it because I am telling you all, A, and B, actually went and got myself supplied, but I'm going back to like charcoal drawing. I
Mhm.
did it in college. I wanted to be an art major. My schedule did not work for it. And I always took the like evening classes from 7 to 9, which was like a great unwind for me. And I was like in this space, but I'm thinking about things that are not my everyday problems. I'm thinking about things that are like more macro conscious. Like, who do I want to be? Like, what am I thinking about when I'm like drawing a figure, or what does my brain choose to draw in that moment? Because I'm not prescriptive. Like, I'm not good at like sitting down and drawing the same figure as everybody else in that moment. I'm gonna be like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. So I'm gonna actually draw what's like past the model, or I'm gonna find something else in the room. And so I got myself all the supplies, and we talked in a couple episodes ago about rituals and what works. And my morning routine is not where this fits in for me. My morning routine is like, how do I ground? It's my time also for movement because I know that I don't have the energy at the end of the day for that. But I have the energy at the end of the day to turn on a playlist that I really love, sit in like a space that is just pretty quiet, that is dedicated to me with no interruptions, and just create. And it doesn't matter. It's
Mhm.
like, it's not my livelihood. Nobody else has to ever see it or love it or think it's good. It's about what the space that I create for myself so that I can process what I need to.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm at.
Well, and I think that's a beautiful rhythm that you showed within your day even. Like I think, you know, we're talking about winter as like a season in the calendar year, and then you have
Mhm.
spring and summer and fall and winter and and it goes. But we also have these patterns within our daily life.
Yep.
And so, charcoal drawing for you is not a morning rhythm feeling. It's not a morning season activity. It sounds like your morning routine is ramping you up. It's kind of like
Yep.
end of winter moving into spring vibes. And then the morning might be spring and the afternoon might be summer. And then the later afternoon is like fall where you're kind of coming down. And it sounds like charcoal drawing is kind of a winter activity to like
Yeah.
allow your nervous system to decompress. Things from the day are dying off. You're helping them die off like through the charcoal drying, and it's
Yeah.
like
Well, and
coming
I
down to rest during the day.
totally. And for
Yeah.
anybody out there, I mean, everybody has some peak in their day typically,
Yeah.
no matter what you do, whether you're a mom, you are a working mom or a stay at home mom, you are
Well, and if you have a job at night where you have to be like on energetically at night, that can look
totally
radically
whatever.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever your rhythm is going to be for me and mine, I think we've talked a little bit about, and this is very Manny Jen.
Mhm.
Um, but I am very much an ambivert. And that's not always outwardly apparent to people, depending on what environment they meet me in.
Will you tell us what an ambivert
Ambivert is.
is?
Yeah. So, like, it is a balance between, like, I can be very extroverted. I
Mm.
can get energy from interactions with other people. And we know from my chart that human connection, relationships,
Yeah,
that
super
really does
priority.
feed me. However, that doesn't mean that I need to constantly be surrounded by people. I actually need the opposite.
Mhm.
I am very intentional about when I can give energy to other people. I am very, I am not somebody who packs their social calendar. I used to be in my 20s. I thought
Well,
that
that's like
was
the
like,
unbalanced expression of that energetic
exactly,
need of connection. It's like, well, more is better, more connection, more activities, more dates, more
exactly.
whatever it
But the
is.
quality was
Right.
terrible.
Your ego is like trying to get a need met that way, and it wasn't getting met, right?
It
So
was,
then
no,
now
it
you're like
was
small doses,
crushing
intentional
me.
connection, intentional engagements, not just
And
packing the
intentional
schedule.
rest and recharge. And
Yes.
so for me to thread back to exactly how you described it, my morning routine absolutely is, how do I ground myself? My movement for me is that resourcing of shaking stuff up, getting my body moving, kind of waking up my energetic systems. And that doesn't mean that it's super intense. Sometimes it's a very gentle movement. It is wherever I can feel like that energy stored. What do I need? I am now in a place where I can be like, oh, okay, this thing that I signed up for, that's going to actually take more from me than it's going to give from an energetic place. And I'm going to make a change and do something different. However, that morning session, whatever I do, I know that as soon as like 8 o'clock hits, I'm on the clock, and my daytime job and my daily expectations, it is energy out 100%.
Right.
I am in meetings every 30
Which is
minutes.
more like summer type vibes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like from 8 a.m. through 5 p.m., depending on what it is. Occasionally, I have some breaks that are in there to like get work done, but it's still like productivity focus. It's still energy out.
Hmm.
So that regrounding at the end of the day allows me to kind of offload and shed. And I would actually say like de energize whatever has activated me through the day,
Hmm.
because even though I'm sitting, it expends more energy than doing a 5 mile run or putting
Right.
myself through something. So at the end of the day, I need that rest and recharge, and I
Right.
don't want any force in it.
Well, and it creates space for newness to come into. I mean, that's
Hmm.
part of winter, metaphorically and literally, is you have to allow cycles of death to
Yep.
happen to make space for new things to be fruited. And when we're not celebrating and creating winter, whatever that is for us, um, it's stifling our creativity. It's stifling where we want to be versus where we've
Yeah.
been. It's cluttering our energetic systems, our mind, body, spirit. And so it's keeping you stuck too. It's keeping you
Yeah.
stuck in cycles that maybe you're working, like some cycles might be really working for you, and you can still be in that cycle of growth and fruiting and spring, if we want to call it that, or summer, if we want to call it that. Versus other things might need
Yeah.
winterizing and allowing to die off. And um, when you were talking too, there's different types of rest too. Like, I
Mhm.
think when we think of rest and recharge, we're like in a bed napping or something, or
Yeah.
like bed rotting. Well, yes. And, there needs to be mental rest. There needs to be emotional rest. There needs to be physical rest. There needs
Yep.
to be spiritual rest. And like a lot of times we think that we have rested, but we've only rested one of those sectors. And so we still are like confused. Well, I took a nap. Why do
Yeah.
I feel just as bad or worse? It's like, well,
Oh,
sometimes mentally, especially
yeah.
like in modern day, stereotypical motherhood, I have so much, right? Like in my brain, like holding the mental labor of running a family. And it's like sometimes I just need mental rest. I don't need physical rest. I just need to like maybe dump everything out on a folder or
Yeah.
delegate to something else or like use an app sometimes can help or whatever it allows you to
Oh,
kind of
totally.
decrease some of that
Well,
mental
also
labor.
just, I mean, there's the permission to ourselves to be like, oh, okay, I need rest now. What does that look like for me? And sometimes that also means like that movement, that release, that is recharge. That can be rest if it's a practice that works for us. But there's the secondary component to all of this that, we talk a little bit about, but it's probably the hardest part. And especially if you have certain personality types or certain human design profiles, if you have historic trauma, if you have n- not necessarily really been able to go in and analyze not only like your internal family systems and parts and all of those things, but that isolation, that inability to ask for help. So even if we're working on giving ourselves permission for something, that very often is going to include having to voice to somebody else what our needs are.
We have to know what
Maybe,
they are.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's maybe asking for actual help, or maybe asking to have your needs heard, which is the help that you need. And so like whether it's in relationship, and I've had it come up a couple of times both like for myself and recently with some folks that I'm working with. And I had somebody who I was working with who experienced a trauma and a grief and was just didn't want to tell anybody in their workplace and didn't want to ask for help there because it's viewed as a weakness. I'm like, hey, listen, like occasionally you gotta if you trust the people around you and you feel like they care for you, you gotta bet on that.
Mhm.
If you don't trust the people around you and you don't think they're gonna take care of you, maybe this is the opportunity we need to like kind of remove ourselves from that situation and plant ourselves somewhere else. But often we're not gonna know until we try.
Mhm.
And it's the flip side of that is to remember when someone's going through something. I'm going to give such a lame example, but I was telling you guys that Winston, our my dog slash our little mascot, um, ate something bad yesterday and was very, very sick. And so my partner and I were supposed to go to dinner, and that was the plan. And he was coming home from work. And while this was happening, so I am trying to clean everything up. And he walks in the door, and I was like, clearly capable of dealing with the situation. Um, but I had just had a very stressful day where there was a lot going on at work, and I was like running on kind of that energetic high. I sacrificed one of my needs where I was like, oh, I'll work out later because this issue is more urgent. And it becomes this compounding snowball effect. And what could have happened was he came in the door and was like, whoa, this is a lot. And instead, he came in the door, and I think I probably looked like I was about to start crying because Winston was getting sick again. And he just looked at me and he was like, "Okay, give me the trash bag. Like I'm going to take this out. I'm going to handle this.
Like, you didn't even
You
have to
just
speak your
like."
needs. You were seen and heard, and then someone stepped in and took it. Like, that
Yeah, and I
there's no
actually
more
needed
nourishing
that
thing than that,
cuz I would
honestly.
have if he was like, "Do you need me to take that out?" I'd be like, "No, I got it."
Right, exactly.
I
Exactly.
needed him to physically like take it from my hand and then be like, "Why don't you go wash your hands?"
Yeah.
It's like that's probably smart.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
But
just
it's the
those like
same.
little tiny, these are not huge movements. It's not like you're going to wake up and be like, oh my God, I can now voice my needs to every person and I'm going to create all this space and the world is going to operate on my rhythm. That's not practical and also not a sustainable change. It's like starts with these tiny little things and getting comfortable with it.
Mhm. Well, when you were talking about that, like being seen in a time of like what felt like crisis at the time, right?
Yeah.
and have your partner see you, address your needs, and then just like take action on it reminds me of our conversation around what to do with people in grief. And
Yeah.
there's so much grief potentially in a wintering season, metaphorically, where maybe a loved one passed away or one of your expectations was not met or you lost a
Yeah.
job. And there comes that season of, okay, I need to rest. I need to regulate. I need to, my world has been turned upside down and now it's falling, things are falling off, things are
Yeah.
dying. I can't even think about spring, much less like plan for it or being intentional about it. But having people around you
Yeah.
that, or being the person that sees someone in a wintering, cycle, and stepping in and not asking, can I take that bag
Yeah.
from you, but saying, I'm taking this bag from you, you go wash your hands,
Yeah.
I'm going to take this out, then we'll come back together and we'll problem solve. That feels so good in
Yeah.
grief. Like when someone dies and someone says, I am sending you money. You
Hmm.
can use it for food. You can use it for whatever
Yeah.
else, an Uber to go to a park or whatever it is, instead of
Yeah.
saying, well, what do you need? And you're like, oh my God, I
Thoughts and
don't
prayers.
know.
Thinking of you. You're in my prayers. It's like, okay, cool. Can you be in my
Okay.
life?
Right, right. Like, how can we, as people not in the griefy season at the time, in the wintering season at the time, maybe we have the energy of spring to be like,
Yeah.
let me bring you this thing. Let me take your children on a play date so you can have space.
This has been heavy on my mind. So, just for anyone listening, we are recording this like at the end of the week. It's like week 1.5 of the LA wildfires.
Mm,
Now, we spoke previously because we live in North Carolina and are very close to the Western North Carolina community and are connected to it personally. I have been really thinking about the energies in like the helping energies, the service of other kind of, I mean, that is one of my, like, my primary love language
yeah.
is acts of service.
Hmm.
And I've been watching because we have been in collective grief since
Hmm.
COVID in a very,
Hmm.
very real way. And now we're in this new chapter where the climate change is driving all of these additional climate impacts in from natural disasters. And we know from the data and we've seen the acceleration of all of this. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is something that I have spent a lot of time being educated on and do professionally. It's not going to slow down.
Hmm.
This is not like a coincidence that there are slash three or four like concurrent, or maybe not concurrent, but very closely aligned natural disasters. This is the new normal.
Hmm.
It's going to
Well,
be
the
more.
insurance companies obviously know that.
They absolutely know that. They have been looking at it for quite some time and incrementally making changes
Hmm.
that our rhythms and systems of not digging in and avoiding or assuming that the problem was further away just didn't align to. So we're now at this like kind of certainly a crisis point when it comes to, oh, what are we going to do? Most of the actions have been aligned to this idea of like 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, we already blew that out of the water. We're not going back. It's over. So we have to recalibrate with like a new destination, a new future. What's hard about that, and let's take the like scientific and my super nerdy aspect away,
One in human
climate
design, all of
risk.
those human
Yeah.
design familiar people. Val has
Well,
a one in her profile.
I do. Climate risk and climate change, like what makes it important is because it directly impacts people, businesses, societies, communities. And if you are more on the fiscal side of things, it absolutely is first going to impact our
Yeah.
financial integrity, our economy, all of those things. No stone is left unturned here. And so we're seeing that and we're getting like a real shock to the system. And so we could nerd out on that data all day long and think about frequency and intensity and all of that. But when I think about Western North Carolina and I'm watching, like, okay, we have this next new disaster. Well, folks in and around LA, because I, of course, had that like empathic and
Hmm.
compassionate like desire to be like, oh my God, I need to help. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, wait. I helped with Western North Carolina and we're at a fatigue point there. This new thing is happening. I'm watching the energy shifts where the people in LA who didn't experience that
Hmm.
have energy. And we're
Hmm.
seeing that coast of the world, like whether we're talking about Canada flying in
Mm.
to help, or the Mexican firefighters that came up to help, which we totally don't deserve. All
And the
of those things,
incarcerated
the incarcerated
firefighters. It's
firefighters.
like, oh my God.
But that shift, it's a similar energy system. I would love to know
Hmm.
the human design of America, but that's a next level conversation, Rachel. Um, but we're seeing that shift in energy. And so for me, it was a reminder. It was like, oh, wait, no, this is not my invitation to pick up in an area where the energy is now flowing. I have to look back at
Yeah.
Western North Carolina and be like, I need to pick up the energy back here, because we still have so many people that are unhoused, have no heating, are living in tents. They still
Well,
have
and
no
then we're in
resources,
winter
and we're
and
in
they're
winter.
getting just unbelievably low temperatures, tons of
Yeah.
snow, and people don't have housing,
And how are
food,
they going to
safety.
rebuild if we've been
Yeah.
relying on the same people's energy systems who are in crisis, who are
Right.
in grief?
They're in a
And so,
metaphorical and literal winter.
totally.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking about it conceptually. It's like, okay, if we know intellectually and scientifically and very factually that this is going to be the new normal, the need to figure out how to resource and recharge and have energy to sustain this higher level of crisis and
Yeah.
anxiety and impact, because the world that we expected based off of the trajectory of the last 30 years in terms of technological advancements, like other advancements, it's now actually countering the
Hmm.
progress we thought we were making. And so part of why I think it's so important, and I do think that we're seeing these huge collective shifts of people being like, wow, this has been a lot for my system. But it's more questions of like, why am I so tired?
Hmm.
Why does this feel so hard? Everything has changed. It's like 100%. We have to take that recharge time to let our systems recalibrate, so that when we do emerge back out, whether it is in the literal spring or in just the chapter when we have enough energy to be like, okay, like I can move forward, we need to have those practices and those skills so that we don't, we're going to burn ourselves out as we're burning ourselves down.
Exactly. And we need, if we're going to create the world that we want, we have got to prioritize wintering,
Yeah.
hibernation, recalibration, rest of all sorts that we talked about, because it's literally impossible. It goes against all
Yeah.
the nature of creativity, but also our human systems to rebuild a world that is sustainable and equitable and working for everyone. If we don't prioritize rest and recharge and recalibration, it's not going to happen. And we're going to, like you
Yeah.
said, burn ourselves out while we're burning ourselves down. And I mean, there's lots of wisdom traditions of ways to winter and cultures that do
Yeah.
prioritize wintering and resting and hibernation. And I wish we would take some notes from that. I mean, even
Yeah.
in, I've grown up in and still remain in Christianity lens, and there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm sure that's a few episodes. But the Bible, says that creation happened in 6 days and then they rested on the seventh day. I mean, that is a metaphorical roadmap for Christians out there. Like, there's a creation
Yeah.
cycle and there is a rest cycle. And I don't believe that was literally 6 days and then on the seventh rested.
Yeah.
That is very metaphorical and symbolic to me. And so if we want to uphold this national Christian lens, how about take notes from there?
Yeah.
Rest. It's not just on Sundays.
Yeah.
It's metaphorical. It's a period of rest. It is a time of integration. It is a critical component to the revolution,
Personal and otherwise.
personal and collective, because what is personal is also
That's
collective.
right.
So if you are burning yourselves out, we are burning ourselves out. If you are resting, we get to rest. We get to
Yeah.
recalibrate.
And it's also like, I hear this a lot, and listen, I'll put this out there from like a trauma perspective, and I will receive back from you from a human design perspective, because the differences in people are certainly foundationally there. But if we're talking, and the perspective I come from a lot and what I think about a lot is trauma and nervous system dysregulation. And really, and we were talking about this earlier just before we even started recording, just the reminder that I give myself all the time and that I give others that I'm speaking to, that like, hey, remember, trauma work and trauma recovery is not about, and I'll go a little bit deeper than like the meme culture, but like it's not about learning how to handle trauma better. It's not necessarily about just picking apart your trauma. There's a huge value in understanding like what happens with the brain in trauma, what the responses sound like, so that you can have that conscious recognition of what's going on. However, truly the work is about relearning how to experience joy, how
Mm.
to regulate your nervous system, how to operate from that place where you can actually be conscious and intuitive and all of those things, because trauma strips that from us.
Well, and I think as Winston is whispering sweet nothings into my ear, um, hold on, buddy.
Winston, go lie down, babe.
When you're speaking about trauma and resting, it kind of goes back to that point when people would say, like in parenting, like simply pause to respond instead of react. And that was so triggering for me before I did my trauma healing
Yeah.
work. I definitely don't want the message here to be simply rest. Just
Yeah.
simply rest. Because all of us at this point have trauma in our systems from various
Hmm.
reasons and various levels and have had various degrees of healing or not. Simply resting might feel really hard, even if
Yeah.
you give yourself the space in your schedule, in your time to intentionally rest mind, body, spirit. That might be extremely hard if you haven't done trauma work and
Yeah.
trauma healing because, like, through a meditation lens. So I'm a Reiki practitioner, master, and meditation instructor, and a lot of people are super triggered in meditation and saying
Yeah.
like, well, oh, I can't clear my thoughts. I can't sit still, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, because what are you running from, right? Like our trauma wants us amped up and running on other
Well,
circuits, not resting.
perfect segue
Yeah.
slash probably like a connector. Um, so where I think about it a lot, because I get a lot of, it's really, really easy when you're starting trauma healing or you never thought that you had significant trauma, but you did.
That was
That
me.
like, yeah, the
That was
intellectual
me.
bypassing. And also if you are smart and you read the books and you like watch all of Brene Brown's emotional healing journey, like you can take in information, but it comes back to like embodying it and recognizing it in your body to whether or not it's actually going to be effective. Being able to repeat it is very different than living it.
Well, and
And
trauma likes to settle in our subconscious and in our nervous system,
totally.
not in our conscious mind a lot of
Yeah.
times.
And
Yeah.
I've had this conversation so many times where you can see from the outsider. I can typically tell by like even small habits, and you will be able to too from like a human energetics perspective, when someone's nervous system is
Yeah.
dysregulated and they're making decisions and their choice comes from that dysregulation. And so years ago, and I have kind of two stories here. Years ago, I was totally in that space and I was like bopping around and trying to figure it out. And it was sort of like coming back to the like kind of bypassy but existential question of like, what am I doing with my life? Like
Yeah.
everything feels like trash. And it was because I'm like spinning on this unnatural trauma energy and on this like just complete dysregulation. And I had a coworker who had just gone through 10 years of healing who was like, hey, and he was a great mentor. And he was just like, hey, are you running to or from?
Mhm.
And in that immediate moment, I was like making mental arguments for both. And it was also like, what is the correct answer is how I'm going to frame my answer to this, because it was like well, it's one or the other. Which one's the trick? It was probably 7 or 8 years later when I went back, I just wrote him an email and was like, hey, I'm not running to or from. I am fine. And it was that like I had to understand that like those impulses that came up to like buy the plane ticket, purchase the thing, get that like need met through an impulse of dysregulation. And it's come up a lot. And, you know, Angie, we've talked about this a ton with Angie. And since she
Mhm.
does work with you, it's a great example. She's doing a ton of travel, but it's because she's on this like long term, she's very intentional with what she's doing.
Mhm.
It's a very planned, it's a very much feeding her. She is not
She's not
coming
running
from,
from
she's not
something.
running from anything and she's not trying to run towards something. She's
Well, and she's taking a
intentionally,
pause too.
oh, totally.
Yeah.
But she is intentionally
She's taking a
and
rest.
with absolute measure, and she's sustainably building this future. And we see so much. There's such great memes out there that are hilarious, but also not hilarious. That it's like those conversations between whoever it is and their therapist. And it's like the therapist says, like, what do we do when we're dysregulated? And the person's
Yeah.
like checkout cart or book flight
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And occasionally, like this comes up a lot with folks in my life or folks that I'm talking to, because if you have enough security and you're not in an absolute crisis, it's so easy to bypass and make excuses for like, oh, well, I'm doing this because like, this is really important to me and I've always really liked this. And I'm like, have you always really liked this since the point you became dysregulated and experienced your trauma? And this was the quote, safe avoidant pattern that you created to achieve it? Because until you break that pattern and sit in the absolute mind boggling discomfort of what that impacted and why it created that cycle in your system, you're just running from or to. You are not consciously building your life. And I think that's a really hard thing to grasp. And I remember we were having a conversation. I think it was this was before we started the podcast, and we were working with somebody and talking about different groups of people. And if there is a culture that is built, we were talking conceptually about what we wanted to do with this. And like, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, so-and-so's a part of X culture or tribe or identity. So like, of course they're going to feel like that. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't mean that it's right for them or it's right for the world. It means they have experienced this dysregulating thing. And if the culture of that group was built out of trauma, was built out of oppression, was built out of scarcity, the cycles of that culture, just because that makes you feel like have a place of belonging doesn't mean it's healthy.
Right.
And so it's just a really difficult thing to process through, because even when you're looking at any group, everyone has a different type. Everyone's going to have a different human design. They're going to have different eccentricities, different personal life experiences. But if you're still trying to fit into this collective norm of a culture that was based off of, well, I would say actually any culture, either based off of oppression, trauma, or scarcity, or power, privilege,
Oppression.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, oppressor groups.
Well, don't you think that's why we have such like energetics of overconsumption?
Oh,
It's like
absolutely.
it's a
Because we don't
collective
need any of those things.
manifestation of running from ourselves, trauma, trying to fill a hole that only regulation and rest and equity and sustainability
We
will
need
fill.
7 outfits.
Right.
Like we need enough clothes to survive, and we only need the clothes to survive.
Right.
I mean, my dad was the CEO of a large company that was like an international company, and he buys his jeans for like $19 at Target, and that's with inflation. So like, there's no scenario that's like, you must have X to be successful. It's like totally, my dad has incredible confidence and self-worth, but also empathy and compassion. And I look at him and I'm like, oh, you totally got the right memo. And I spent a lot of time in the world with the wrong memo of like, no, but it matters what label you're wearing. It matters what car you drive. It matters XYZ things that don't actually bring us safety or self-worth. But we think that we can, quote, trick ourselves and trick other people into seeing our worth without changing anything internal.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about that a ton. As I told you 45 minutes ago, that I like impulse purchase on ThredUp because I love ThredUp, and it's like feeding a thing, but I know that it's better than paying $200 for a pair of shoes.
Right. Well, my manifestation of that is I have so many abandoned carts out there. Like I just send them all love right now. Like all those abandoned carts that I've filled up.
I didn't mean to
with
abandon
this,
you.
like,
I love
triggered
you.
response of like, I want this, I want this, I want this. But then some part of me overtakes me. I'm like, no, you don't. Just let it be. Give it a pause, give it a rest, give it something and revisit it. And if you still want it, maybe go back. Yeah, I don't go back to that shit. I don't ever go back to those abandoned carts.
You didn't need it.
And now marketers, are all like, are you sure though? Mm-hmm. Are you sure you don't need it? I'm like, maybe I do. I don't know. Well, and that's going to present differently depending on what your aura type is too. Yeah. Like the way you cope when you're triggered from trauma and where that trauma is stored and how it presents has many factors, but your human design can point you towards that. And you can kind of see those patterns of like running from yourself with a little more context, but it can also show you how much actual energetic rest you
Yeah.
need. So if you don't have a motor, like Val's a manifesting generator, her sacral energy system, that space below your belly button is your sacral chakra. Hers is
Mhm.
defined. She has lots of energy running all the time. Mine is also defined. I have lots of energy running out. Um, we might not resonate with a season of winter very much because
Yeah.
we have a lot of energy going all the time as long as we're prioritizing all of those themes in that energy center. Whereas, like Angie, for instance, who, we talk about here on this
Yeah.
podcast, that we have the episode a few episodes back about female leadership, she is a projector energy type. And so she doesn't have her own energetic engine.
Yeah.
So her prioritizing her rest is like an energetic, like ab-
Yeah.
absolute priority, or she can't like daily function.
Yeah.
Whereas, an energetic type, like a manifesting generator and a generator, we take a while before we can like burn out and have to actually rest, before we get
Yeah.
like mentally unwell, emotionally unwell, physically unwell. That's kind of burnout is kind of the indicator where,
Yeah.
oh, shoot, maybe I should like rest
And
and
it's easy to try
recharge.
and ignore those impulses to
Yeah.
rest because we're like, but I have energy right now. I need to use it.
Right. And what energy are you running on? Are you running on traumatic impulsing,
Yep.
or are you running on a true motor too? Like reflectors have no motor. They've got to
Yeah.
rest. They've got to recharge. They've got to winter every day. They have a cycle of 28 days. They've got to winter all throughout that. But then
Yeah.
at the end of a 28-day cycle or a long cycle, they've got to winter. They've got to empty out. They've got to recharge. They've got to die off. And then a manifester too. Like manifestors are really tricky because they do have such spurts of creativity where it's like motor, 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 running, running,
Mhm.
running, energy, 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 but then like have to rest because they don't
Yeah.
have an actual motor. So it can feel really destabilizing and confusing because you're like, well, when I'm like this, I have a lot of energy, or maybe you have a lot of mental energy, but not a lot of physical vitality. And it's like, well, is that because you are dysregulated and you need some balancing, or is it because you haven't allowed for the type of
Yeah.
rest you need for your design, or what? But the human design can give you a lot of context on what type of rest, how
Yeah.
often, what quality.
Are you feeding your energy system or are you
Yes,
feeding your dysregulation?
exactly. Well, and I talked about that with a client yesterday too, is like the schedule is and priorities are full right now for her.
Mhm.
But this one thing she really wants to add has a lot of capabilities of like feeding her system. Well, she's a manifesting generator too. So
Yeah.
she doesn't really know until she puts her energy into that how much that's going to feed her or take away from her. So sometimes you do have to put your energy into something before you realize, oh, this is actually feeding my energy. This is giving me more spring like
Yeah.
vibes versus, oh no, this reminds me that I actually don't need this in my schedule and in my
Yeah.
capacity. I really need to allow space for recharge, rest, and that will feed me more than this like activity.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think what it comes down to, and to just close it out for folks that are listening, you have to listen to yourself. I mean, that's like the punchline of everything that we talk about, like listening to yourself, doing whatever you need to do to create the space, create the environment for you to even just starting at 5 minutes a day, if that's all that you have, find that space, find that time to breathe, to recharge, to think about like, what do you really want? And maybe mentally try to really create that boundary between what you really want and what you think other people really expect or want from you. And just lean into that. I would say also accept the invitation for wintering. If it doesn't align to you in the like seasonality that we talk about and the like actual cold weather seasons, or you live somewhere where that's not really a part of your seasons, like you're not getting all four seasons in that way, creating some sort of intentional cycle, some sort of intentional opportunities for yourself to be like, okay, for the next 3 months, I'm going to really focus on these things to get myself organized, to figure out what I want to do. And I'm going to be really intentional about saying no to things that don't align with that. And I think just that practice in and of itself helps you to go into whatever season or whatever chapter you're in of like, is this aligned with me? And I'm going to have strong boundaries and I'm going to write down what my top 3 goals or priorities are, stick it on my mirror, have it in my phone, have it somewhere where I can see it constantly. So I make sure that I'm not moving in an inorganic or unnatural way from that. And just give yourself the permission to do what you need, ask for what you need, And then always in like the compassionate spin that we like to have here, notice those around you and be mindful of what you're asking of them if they seem like they maybe don't have the energy for it, so that we can all start to create these like relationships and connections that are safer, more empowering, more energetic, and allow us to like recharge. So if you're somebody who like likes to make plans, think about who's on the receiving end of that. Is it really about going out to a club, or could you see that person in a place in their home or in your home, which is more aligned with their energy and have just as good of an exchange of connectivity? So lots of options, but happy wintering.
Thank you so much for listening to Human Sessions. If you loved this episode, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can join our Human Sessions. We'll see you in the next episode.